March 27, 1941. The Mediterranean lay silent, cold as steel. Inside a command bunker in Alexandria, a forgotten golf bag waited by a side door. The perfect alibi for an admiral about to disappear. Offshore, 3 British battleships slid quietly through the dark: Warspite, Valiant, and Barham. No signal lamps, no music, only the sound of metal, oil, and the slow ticking of luminous watches. 800 miles west in Sicily, a German intelligence officer stared at reconnaissance photos through a magnifying glass. His encrypted report to Rome was brief. Only 1 British battleship remains operational, no carriers. That conclusion would burn through 3 weeks of Italian planning and erase an entire illusion of naval superiority, because that night the British fleet carried 3 weapons invisible to any camera: deception, radar, and ultra. A carrier hidden beneath a covered dock. Type 279 antennas scanning the sea far beyond human sight. And in a wooden hut at Bletchley Park, a 19-year-old woman breaking the Italian Enigma code. As darkness swallowed Cape Matapan, one question remained. Could a single mistaken report destroy an entire fleet? Early March 1941, the Mediterranean Sea looks calm, too calm. At the British base in Alexandria, the harbor seems lifeless. From 25,000 feet above, Luftwaffe cameras capture only broken silhouettes, masts, and empty docks. To German analysts in Sicily, it looks like a graveyard of ships. To the Axis High Command, it is proof that the Royal Navy has finally been broken. In Palermo, General Maximilian von Weichs leans over the photographs, a thin smile forming beneath the lamplight. Nur eine, he whispers. Only one. The message travels by encrypted telegram to Rome, then Naples. Within hours, Italian Admiral Angelo Iachino receives it as gospel truth. He believes what the Germans see. He believes the British fleet is crippled. But beneath the still surface of Alexandria's waters, the silence is deception. Admiral Andrew Brown Cunningham, the man the Germans call the Fox of the Mediterranean, has already turned the entire harbor into a stage. HMS Warspite, his flagship, is hidden behind a floating dry dock, her decks covered with tarpaulins painted to resemble rust and scaffolding. HMS Barham lies almost dark, running only minimal electrical power so that German cameras will see a dead ship. And the new arrival, HMS Formidable, a fully operational carrier, is sealed inside Dock 3 beneath a hangar roof, disguised as an empty repair basin. Even the Admiral himself plays his part. On the afternoon of March 27th, Cunningham strolls across the Alexandria Sporting Club in a white suit, golf bag over his shoulder, within sight of the Japanese consul, known to pass reports to Berlin. For 2 hours he plays an easy round, laughing in the sun. The spies see everything they expect to see. A complacent commander, not a man preparing to sail. At 9:30 that evening, he slips out through a rear door. By 10, he is on the bridge of Warspite, watching her bow cut through the black water. 3 battleships slide silently into the open sea, followed by destroyers and the hidden carrier Formidable. The largest British battle group assembled in the Mediterranean since 1940 is underway, and no one beyond that harbor knows it. In Rome, Benito Mussolini cannot forget Taranto. The humiliation of losing 3 battleships to British biplanes still gnaws at him. Germany's patience has worn thin. Raeder and Göring demand results. At the Marino conference, Grand Admiral Erich Raeder tells the Italians bluntly, "Prove your worth, or Germany will fight the Mediterranean alone." Admiral Iachino feels that weight with every telegram. To him, Operation Gaudo, the planned interception of British convoys bound for Greece, is not just a mission. It is redemption. It is the last chance to restore the honor of the Regia Marina. At Naples, the pride of Italy, the 45,000-ton Vittorio Veneto prepares to sail. 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, 13 destroyers, 4,000 men, all fueled by a promise and a lie. Because what none of them know is that every movement order, every code, every signal has already been broken. At Bletchley Park, in a wooden hut numbered 3, 19-year-old Mavis Batey bends over a sheet of cipher text. For 3 sleepless nights, she has worked beside the veteran codebreaker Dilly Knox. Her pencil stops when she sees one phrase repeated through the static. Oggi giorno meno tre. Today, day -3. It is the key. Within hours, Knox reconstructs the daily settings of the Italian Navy's Enigma machine. By March 25th, the entire operational plan, routes, formations, timings, lies open on Cunningham's desk. Operation Gaudo has been exposed before the first ship leaves harbor. Mavis looks out the window at dawn. Outside, spring rain falls across the English countryside. She does not know it, but her discovery will doom an entire fleet she will never see. Radar Type 279 hums aboard HMS Valiant. A low electronic pulse sweeps through the dark. For the first time in Mediterranean history, a fleet can see beyond the horizon, beyond the human eye. Contacts appear as small, glowing echoes on an oscilloscope. Range 25 miles, bearing 270. In the Italian ships, there is only silence. No radar, no electronic ears, only searchlights and binoculars, weapons from another century. The sea itself has become uneven ground, one side blind, the other omniscient. The first domino falls not in battle, but in analysis. From his Ju-88 bomber at 25,000 feet, Luftwaffe pilot Klaus Weber squints through binoculars. Below him, haze and camouflage nets merge into one. He counts masts, funnels, and guesses. One operational battleship. His report, typed neatly, stamped zuverlässig, reliable, travels up the chain unchecked. No one questions it. No one asks for another flight. A single photograph becomes a prophecy, and prophecies once believed do not die easily. March 28th. From Naples, the Italian fleet moves out in a proud V formation, bows cutting the early light. The sea is glassy, the wind calm. On Vittorio Veneto, crews polish brass and check the great 15-inch guns. Admiral Iachino looks toward the horizon, confident, unaware that he is already being tracked. At 7:55, his cruisers encounter British scouts under Admiral Henry Pridham Whipple. 4 light cruisers, Ajax, Orion, Gloucester, and HMAS Perth, turn east, pretending to flee. Iachino orders pursuit. It is the beginning of the trap. From Formidable's deck, the first wave of Ferry Albacore torpedo bombers lifts into the sun. Engines cough, then roar. Their shadows ripple across the water, unseen by any Italian radar, because there is none. At 11:27 a.m., an Italian radio operator breaks silence. British aircraft carrier reported operational. Previous intelligence incorrect. For Iachino, it is the sound of disbelief. He looks up as the first albacores dive. Torpedoes splash. White wakes streak toward Vittorio Veneto. The ship twists hard to port. The first wave misses, but the formation scatters. At 15:19, Lieutenant Commander John Wellstead's albacore comes in low through a storm of flak. He releases his torpedo at point-blank range. A thunderclap shakes the sea. 4,000 tons of seawater rush into the Italian battleship's hull. Her speed falls to 19 knots. Damage control begins as Wellstead's aircraft, shredded by gunfire, spirals into the water. He dies without seeing the smoke rising from his target. Below decks, the crew fights the flood with pumps and prayer. For the first time, the Regia Marina understands. Air power has reached the age of battleships. By dusk, Cunningham's battleships, Warspite, Valiant, Barham, are only 60 miles away. Radar reports multiple echoes. He issues a single order. Prepare for night action. At the same moment, a message arrives aboard Vittorio Veneto. The heavy cruiser Pola has been torpedoed and left drifting. Italian naval law demands assistance. Zara and Fiume turn back with 2 destroyers to rescue her. It is a noble act, and a fatal one. Italian doctrine values honor above caution. They believe that courage and gunnery can overcome uncertainty, but courage cannot see through darkness. The British have trained for night combat for months. Their radar measures range to the yard. Their crews rehearse firing by coordinates, not by sight. At 22:20, the Type 279 screens glow brighter. Targets: 3 cruisers, 2 destroyers. Range 3,800 yards. Cunningham nods once. Open fire! The order echoes through steel corridors. 15 15-inch guns ignite at once. The Mediterranean turns white. The night explodes. Shells the weight of small cars arc through the dark, trailing sparks. Zara and Fiume are caught in searchlight beams as bright as daylight. On Valiant, midshipman Prince Philip swings the light across the horizon, locking onto the doomed cruisers. British gunners adjust. The second salvo lands true. Fiume takes 4 direct hits. Her magazine detonates. Zara burns from stem to stern. The destroyers Alfieri and Carducci are ripped apart by secondary batteries. In less than 5 minutes, an entire division of the Italian Navy ceases to exist. A survivor later says, "The British appeared from nowhere. Like ghosts. We never even loaded our guns." At 0030, radar still shows 1 drifting contact, Pola. Cunningham hesitates. Mercy or duty? He sends destroyers Jervis and Nubian to investigate. When the British shine their lights, the Italians wave, thinking salvation has arrived. Captain Mario de Padua realizes the truth too late. He orders, "Abbandonare la nave," abandon ship. At 3 o'clock, a single torpedo ends Pola's life. The blast rolls across the sea, then fades into silence. The Mediterranean breathes again. With dawn, rescue begins. British sailors haul hundreds of exhausted Italians from the water, oil-soaked and shivering. Cunningham's message to London is simple. Enemy cruisers destroyed, survivors rescued. No triumph, no exclamation, only duty. On the decks of Valiant, wounded Italians lie beside their captors. War in daylight looks almost human again. Dawn broke over the Ionian Sea with deceptive calm. The horizon glowed pale silver, and for a brief moment, it looked as though the war had paused to take a breath. Below that quiet light, 2 navies were searching for each other. One blind, one watching. By early morning, March the 28th, 1941, Admiral Angelo Iachino's fleet was moving east from Naples in wide formation. The Vittorio Veneto cut through the still water like a blade, its gray hull mirrored perfectly on the surface. Around her, 6 heavy cruisers and their destroyer escorts steamed in perfect rhythm, confident, disciplined, and doomed. At the same time, 400 miles east, the British Mediterranean fleet had reached full speed. Admiral Cunningham's 3 battleships, Warspite, Valiant, and Barham, moved in a long shadow line, their 15-inch guns ready, their radar eyes open. Above them, Carrier Formidable prepared its air groups. The trap was closing. At 6:35 hours, an Italian reconnaissance seaplane spotted British cruisers south of Crete, Ajax, Gloucester, Orion, and HMAS Perth. The message reached Iachino. 4 enemy cruisers, alone, moving east. It was the sight he had been waiting for. Believing them to be an isolated convoy escort, Iachino ordered pursuit. Vice Admiral Sansonetti's 3rd Cruiser Division accelerated, Trento, Trieste, and Bolzano, 8 8-inch guns each, built for daylight battle. Their shells could outrange any British cruiser, but only if they could hit. At 7:55, the first salvos were fired. The Mediterranean echoed with thunder. Italian shells whistled across 10 miles of open sea, plumes of water rising like pillars. For nearly an hour, Sansonetti ships fired over 400 rounds. They struck only twice. Splinter damage on Gloucester's hull, nothing more. The British cruisers, following precise orders, maintained range and turned south, leading their pursuers toward Cunningham's unseen battleships. The Italians thought they were hunting. In truth, they were being led. Inside Vittorio Veneto's plotting room, gunnery officers tracked targets using manual optics and slide rules. Each shell weighed nearly a ton. Each salvo took almost a minute to correct. Their pride in precision blinded them to a new kind of warfare, one measured not by sight, but by signal. The Italian shells landed wide, scattering across the sea. They had power but no cohesion, velocity but no focus. Meanwhile, British gunners aboard Ajax and Orion calmly reported their range to radar control, adjusting not by what they could see, but what they could measure. It was the difference between craftsmanship and mathematics. And in 1941, mathematics had begun to win wars. At 10:55, the first change in the wind came, a faint hum. From the west, black silhouettes appeared low over the horizon, ferry albacore torpedo bombers from HMS Formidable. The Italian lookouts froze. German intelligence had promised there were no operational British carriers in the Mediterranean. What they saw above them should have been impossible. The first wave attacked at 11:27. The sea erupted with flak. Italian gunners filled the sky with orange bursts. The albacores dived through it, old biplanes that looked fragile but refused to break. Their torpedoes fell into the sea and ran straight, white wakes cutting toward the great Vittorio Veneto. Every torpedo missed, but that wasn't the point. Cunningham's pilots weren't trying to destroy the Italian fleet. Not yet. They were trying to push it west, away from Crete, away from the British convoys. More importantly, they were testing the enemy's reactions, speed, formation, and how they moved when frightened. The answers came quickly. Aboard Vittorio Veneto, Iachino felt the unease spreading. His fleet was supposed to dominate. Instead, he was reacting to invisible eyes, to attacks from the air, to ships he couldn't locate. He ordered a course reversal westward toward Taranto. At that same hour, a second albacore strike group took off from Formidable. This time, they came from the south, the direction no one expected. At 15:19, Lieutenant Commander John Wellstead led his flight straight into the Italian formation. Anti-aircraft guns opened fire. Tracer lines crossed the sky like fireflies. Wellstead's plane shook from hits, but he held course, flying through smoke and flame. He dropped his torpedo at barely 500 yards. Seconds later, the Vittorio Veneto shuddered. A dull, heavy boom rolled through her decks. Water rushed into her port side compartments. Power flickered. The ship listed. Her engines slowed to 19 knots. Wellstead's albacore, riddled with holes, fell into the sea and vanished. He never saw the smoke rising from the battleship he had crippled. Damage control parties raced to seal compartments. Engineers pumped water from the flooded engine room. The wounded screamed beneath the deck plates. Above, Iachino gripped the railing and refused to look away. He had been told his enemy had no carriers, no radar, no plan. Every assumption was collapsing. By sunset, Vittorio Veneto was limping home, screened by her destroyers. But the British were not finished. The final blow would come not from the air, but from the night. At 19:30, radio signals reported that the heavy cruiser Pola had been struck by a torpedo. Her engine room destroyed, her lights dead. She drifted helplessly, still afloat, sending desperate signals into the dark. By Italian naval law, a ship in distress could not be abandoned. Iachino gave the order. Send assistance. Zara and Fiume will recover survivors. The decision was honorable. It was also fatal. Neither he nor his captains understood what awaited them beyond the horizon. At 2200 hours, the British fleet, moving in total blackout, received a radar contact. Range 8 miles, bearing 270 degrees, 3 cruisers, 2 destroyers, speed slow. Cunningham's voice was calm. Maintain silence. Close range. The radar operators watched the echoes drift closer. 6 miles, 5, 4. At 3,800 yards, Cunningham spoke a single word. Fire! 15 British guns roared at once. The night became white. Muzzle flashes split the dark like lightning. The shock waves rolled across the decks. Zara and Fiume were caught broadside, perfectly outlined in British searchlights. The first salvos tore through their armor. Shells weighing nearly a ton each punched through steel, exploded, and tore the ships open like paper. Men were thrown from gun turrets into fire and steam. Within minutes, Fiume's magazine detonated, a single flash that reached the clouds. Midshipman Prince Philip, aboard Valiant, swung his searchlight from one wreck to the next, marking targets for the gunners. Below him, British shells fell in steady rhythm, measured by radar, not sight. In 5 minutes, it was over. The Zara was sinking. Fiume burned. The destroyers Alfieri and Carducci disintegrated under secondary fire. The Mediterranean's night was bright enough to read by. When the firing stopped, the sea was full of cries. Oil burned on the surface, casting an orange glow over hundreds of men struggling in the waves. A survivor, Seaman Giuseppe Formato, later said, "They came from nowhere, like ghosts. Their lights found us the way God finds a sinner." For hours, British sailors threw ropes and life rings into the dark. Cunningham ordered rescue operations at first light. His signal to London was short. Enemy cruisers destroyed, survivors being recovered. He would later write, "We sank them, yes, but we saved whom we could. They fought bravely, but they fought blind." At 2:40, HMS Jervis approached the crippled Pola. Her crew waved flashlights, thinking the approaching ships were Italian. When British voices answered in English, Captain Mario de Padua understood. He ordered his men to abandon ship, saluted the ensign, and stayed aboard. Moments later, a single torpedo ended Pola's life. The explosion lit the horizon one last time. By dawn on March 29th, silence returned to the Mediterranean. Smoke hung low over the water. Wreckage drifted for miles. The battle, if it could still be called a battle, was over. When Cunningham looked over the sea that morning, he said nothing. He had achieved total victory, and he knew it had come not from bravery, but from information. Radar had seen through darkness. Ultra had seen through lies, and deception had blinded an empire. He turned to his staff and said quietly, "Intelligence won this one, not us." On the horizon, sunlight broke through the haze, pale, indifferent. Beneath it, the Mediterranean carried its dead, its lesson. In modern war, ignorance kills faster than courage. March 29th, 1941. The night that began with deception now ended in silence. But beneath the calm sea, a different battle continued. One fought in darkness, smoke, and fear. The Italian cruisers Zara and Fiume were burning wrecks. Inside, corridors glowed red with heat. Steam hissed through ruptured pipes. Men stumbled through the smoke, searching for ladders that no longer existed. The sea was their only exit. The water, their only refuge. Aboard Zara, Ensign Giulio Perotti recalled, "We thought it was dawn because everything was bright. Then the light turned red and we realized it was fire. Flames raced along oil lines and cable conduits. Gun turrets, heated beyond tolerance, exploded in place. The steel deck buckled under their feet. When Zara began to list, hundreds of men jumped into the burning water. At sea level, the Mediterranean was chaos. Wreckage floated among bodies. Searchlights from British destroyers cut through the smoke, illuminating faces slick with oil. Sailors clung to debris, shouting for comrades who could no longer answer. From HMS Jervis, Petty Officer Richard Doran later wrote, "We could hear them calling, Italian, English, all the same. The sea didn't care whose side you were on. Some men tried to swim toward the British lights, others away. Oil fires spread like a black curtain. Each spark was enough to turn the surface into a sheet of flame. Many drowned quietly to escape the heat above. The air stank of diesel, blood, and salt. And through it all came the slow, hollow sound of ships dying. Metal folding, rivets snapping, and bulkheads collapsing inward like lungs exhaling their last breath. Further west, the crippled cruiser Pola still floated, eerily intact. Her engines were silent, her power gone. Inside, men lit candles in the dark, waiting for orders that would never come. The radio operator tapped an SOS into static. No one answered. Some believed rescue would come from Zara or Fiume. Others simply prayed. The ship drifted, turning slowly with the current. Every groan of her hull echoed like a heartbeat, faint, irregular, dying. When HMS Jervis appeared at 2:30, her searchlight swept across Pola's deck. For a moment, the Italians cheered. They thought salvation had arrived. But the beam revealed something else. The white ensign of Britain, not the tricolor of Italy. Captain Mario de Padua understood immediately. He ordered the code books destroyed and the crew to abandon ship. Then he remained on the bridge, alone, as the British destroyer fired a single torpedo. At 2:40, Pola disappeared beneath the waves. Her captain went with her. At sunrise, the survivors began to drift together. Hundreds of men in life jackets, clinging to each other in silence. The sea had turned cold, the fires gone. Cunningham ordered all available ships to rescue as many as possible before daylight made them targets for German bombers. British sailors hauled Italians aboard with ropes and stretchers. Oil and seawater made their skin black and slick, their eyes wide with exhaustion. One sailor from 8ms Valiant said, "We didn't see enemies anymore, just men who had been through hell." On the quarterdeck, wounded Italians lay beside their rescuers. Some asked for cigarettes, others for water. No one spoke of war. The battle had ended, but the suffering had not. Far away in England, at Bletchley Park, Mavis Batey had no idea of the devastation her decoding had unleashed. She continued working through the night, translating intercepted signals from Italian coastal stations. At 6 a.m., a message confirmed heavy losses: Zara, Fiume, Pola, and 2 destroyers missing. She stared at the text for several seconds, then pushed her chair back. "All that from one phrase," she whispered. "Day -3. No celebration followed. In Hut 3, victory sounded like paper rustling and pencil scratching. They had done their job, and thousands of men were dead because of it. It was the kind of triumph that left no joy, only silence. Cunningham understood that silence. In his private log, he wrote, "The enemy never knew we were coming, and that is what troubles me." The integration of ultra-intelligence and radar had created a new kind of warfare, one where battles could be decided before they began. The human element was still present, but secondary. Skill, courage, and experience no longer mattered as much as who could read the other's mail first. For the men on deck, it felt like fate. For the men in London, it felt like logic. And in that gap, between human courage and mathematical certainty, the soul of warfare was quietly changing. In Rome, news of the disaster reached Mussolini on the morning of March 30th. Witnesses said he turned pale, then silent. When he finally spoke, his words were bitter. "They died because we believed the Germans." German intelligence officers in Sicily tried to shift blame. The Luftwaffe had flown too few reconnaissance missions. Italian admirals had acted recklessly. No one accepted fault. But in Berlin, the reaction was different. Admiral Raeder saw the truth. The Mediterranean had slipped away. If the Italians could not hold it, Germany would have to. and that would mean spreading their navy even thinner. The Battle of Cape Matapan had not only destroyed ships, it had fractured an alliance. The survivors brought back more than trauma. They brought questions. Why had they not seen the enemy? Why had the British fired with such accuracy in total darkness? The answer, they soon learned, was a word few had ever heard: radar. In Italian naval circles, the term was whispered like superstition. Some officers refused to believe it. Others demanded proof. But those who had been there needed no explanation. They had seen the light that killed them. Engineers began frantic efforts to develop their own radar systems. But Italy's industry, strangled by lack of copper and fuel, could not keep up. By the time the first prototypes appeared, the war had already moved past them. The age of sight was ending. The age of signal had begun. In Taranto, the survivors disembarked, oil-stained, silent, hollow-eyed. Reporters waited for statements. None came. One officer muttered only, "We went to sea with honor," and came back with nothing. Hospitals overflowed with burn victims and frostbite cases. The smell of oil clung to them for weeks. Even after washing, their skin shone faintly black in the light, a mark left by the sea itself. At night, some screamed in their sleep, reliving the flash that blinded them. Others sat awake, staring at their hands. They had survived, but they no longer knew why. Cunningham returned to Alexandria without ceremony. Reporters asked for victory photos. He refused. In his report to the Admiralty, he wrote only, "Enemy force annihilated, damage to our ships negligible," and beneath that, "We rescued all we could." But in his private notes, a different tone emerged. It was a massacre, and the men we destroyed were brave. The victory at Matapan secured British control of the Eastern Mediterranean, but it left Cunningham uneasy. He had seen the future of war, and it looked mechanical, not human. When the British fleet anchored again at Alexandria, the sailors who had fired those shells gathered on deck. They watched the sea in silence, as if expecting ghosts to rise from it. A petty officer whispered, "They didn't even shoot back." No one replied, because everyone knew it was true. The Italian cruisers had died without firing a single effective shot. Blinded by the night, betrayed by technology. It was not a fair fight. But then, modern war no longer pretended to be fair. Hundreds of miles away, divers explored the wreck sites years later. They found the Zara upright, her gun still pointing toward the horizon. Inside, the crew quarters were eerily preserved. Coffee cups on tables, uniforms still folded. Time had frozen in the moment of impact. To the divers, it felt like trespassing in a cathedral. The silence was absolute, broken only by the creak of shifting metal. In that underwater stillness, it was clear. These men had not died for glory or empire. They had died because one photograph, one misread signal, had told them to sail. Back at Bletchley, the machines kept running. The code breakers had no time to rest. Italy's Enigma network shifted frequencies, but the analysts were already ahead. New intercepts filled the airwaves. Convoys, orders, panic. To the people inside Hut 3, the war existed only as numbers and letters. They never saw the faces, never heard the cries. Theirs was a clean war, a war of silence and intellect. But the ghosts of Matapan lingered even there, unseen, like static between transmissions. The Battle of Cape Matapan marked more than a naval defeat. It was the first clear line between old war and new, between the world of sailors and the world of signals. The Italians fought with pride, courage, and tradition. The British fought with information, coordination, and machine precision. Between them lay the future, a battlefield governed not by bravery, but by data. The men who died at Matapan belonged to the last generation that still believed war was personal. They looked into the night and searched for the enemy's eyes, and found only the cold light of radar staring back. As the sun rose over the Mediterranean, the sea was calm again. Oil slicks drifted toward the Greek coast, carrying the last traces of the battle. A boot, a life jacket, a torn photograph. The water shone gold under the morning light, as if trying to disguise the truth of what lay beneath. 3 heavy cruisers, 2 destroyers, 4,000 souls, all lost to a single night and a single mistake. The Royal Navy steamed east, unchallenged. The Regia Marina stayed in port, broken. The balance of the Mediterranean had changed forever. And somewhere, in a quiet room in England, a young woman folded her decoding notes, unaware that her pencil had just rewritten naval history. March 29th, 1941. The Mediterranean is still again. The smoke thins, the fires die, and the sea begins to erase its own wounds. Only the scent of fuel oil and burnt paint hangs in the air. From the bridge of HMS Warspite, Admiral Cunningham watches the horizon fade from black to silver. He does not smile. Around him, his officers stand in silence, exhausted. Below, sailors wash the decks where oil and blood have mixed with salt water. The battle is over, yet no one feels victory. Cunningham writes a single line in his diary: 3 cruisers destroyed, 2 destroyers sunk, 1 fleet silenced, and still the sea looks calm. For 2 days, the water around Cape Matapan is a graveyard. Debris floats for miles. Broken lifeboats, twisted steel, unopened ration tins. On some planks, the dead lie face down, their uniforms bleached by salt. Greek fishermen who venture near pull their nets full of splinters instead of fish. At dawn on the 31st, British destroyers still search for survivors. One petty officer writes, "You could walk on wreckage from ship to ship, and under every board there was someone. The sea gives back only what it chooses." In Rome, the news arrives quietly. A clerk enters Mussolini's office, pale, carrying a telegram from Taranto. When he reads the words 3 heavy cruisers lost, Mussolini grips the edge of his desk and says nothing for a long time. Finally, he murmurs, "They died because we trusted Berlin." Admiral Iachino sends his official report that same evening. Enemy appeared suddenly at night. They possessed radar. We did not. It is 3 short sentences that change the direction of Italy's naval war. No excuses, no heroics, just the plain truth. In Berlin, blame becomes policy. The Luftwaffe accuses the Italians of cowardice. The Italians accuse German intelligence of negligence. No one admits that both are right. Grand Admiral Raeder, reading the intercepted dispatches, notes grimly, "If Italy cannot hold the sea, Germany will have to. But Germany is already stretched thin, preparing for the Balkans, for North Africa, for Russia." Matapan has done what British strategy alone could not. It has divided the Axis at sea. Hitler postpones the invasion of Malta, uncertain whether any Italian ship can be trusted to fight again. In England, far from the Mediterranean, 19-year-old Mavis Batey files another decrypted message. She has not slept in 2 days. The message reads simply, "Fleet lost, survivors rescued by British." She places her pencil down and stares at the paper. The rain taps softly on the window of Hut 3. No one celebrates. Around her, the machines continue to clatter, translating new intercepts. War never pauses. Later, she writes in her notebook, "We won," they say, "but what we really did was listen better." For Italy, Matapan exposes every weakness. No radar, no night fighting doctrine, no reliable air coordination. In the weeks that follow, engineers scramble to build prototypes of German Fiume radar sets for Italian hulls. But there is no copper, no trained technicians, no time. Within months, Britain equips every capital ship with dual radar arrays and automated fire control links. The Mediterranean has become a laboratory, and the Royal Navy its master experimenter. War has crossed an invisible line from steel and gunpowder to electricity and information. When Cunningham returns to Alexandria, reporters are waiting on the pier. He refuses interviews. To the Admiralty, his official cable is concise: enemy force destroyed, own losses nil. But in his private notes, he adds another line: a victory of machines over men, and that is never a victory to celebrate. He attends the burial at sea for a handful of rescued Italians who died of wounds. When the weighted shrouds slide into the water, he removes his cap. No one speaks. The sound of the sea is enough. Through the summer of 1941, the Italian Navy seldom sails beyond its harbors. Fuel stocks are down to a fraction of wartime needs. Convoy escorts become their only task. British control of the eastern sea lanes is now absolute. From Gibraltar to Crete, the Union Jack flies unchallenged. Convoys reach Greece, later evacuate from it under the same protection that destroyed Iachino's fleet. The Mediterranean, once called Mare Nostrum, is now an English lake. 2,300 Italians never return. 1,000 are pulled from the sea, many burned or blind from flash exposure. Hospitals in Taranto overflow. Corridors smell of iodine and diesel. Some sailors still have fragments of British shell casing embedded in their flesh. A chaplain writes home, "They speak of radar as if it were witchcraft. They cannot understand how the enemy saw them in the dark. And in truth, they never will, because what destroyed them was not hatred, but mathematics." In Rome, the Japanese naval attaché, Captain Takashi Naito, sends his final analysis to Tokyo. His conclusion is precise: night combat against radar-equipped forces must be avoided. The Imperial Navy must develop equivalent technology. Admiral Yamamoto reads the report carefully, then draws the opposite lesson. He decides that Japan will master night optics instead. 2 years later, that decision shapes the battles of Guadalcanal and costs Japan dearly. Matapan's echoes reach all the way to the Pacific. In 1999, Italian divers locate the wrecks of Zara and Fiume nearly 500 meters below the surface. The ships sit upright, their guns still elevated as if waiting for orders. On one bulkhead, a diver's light reveals an inscription carved by a sailor before the end: "Per la patria, non per la gloria," for the fatherland, not for glory. Silt drifts through broken passageways like smoke. Fish move through open doors. The sea has turned them into monuments. After the war, Admiral Iachino faces inquiry but no condemnation. His honesty saves him. He writes a report that future generations of officers will study for decades. The battle revealed our inferiority in effective aero-naval cooperation and the backwardness of our night battle technology. In Britain, Cunningham retires a hero, though he rarely speaks of Matapan. When pressed, he says only, "We were lucky to be ahead by 2 years of invention." He never calls it a victory again. Matapan becomes a case study in military academies. Its lessons are clear and cold. Intelligence equals power. Technology equals survival. But beneath those equations lies a question no one can solve. If victory depends on machines, what happens to the value of courage? Historians later write that Cape Matapan was the night courage became obsolete. Perhaps they are right, perhaps not. For the men who fought there, courage still mattered. It simply wasn't enough. Today, the waters around Cape Matapan are quiet. Fishermen still cast their nets there, unaware that their anchors touch history. Beneath them rest the bones of sailors from both sides, Italian and British, sharing one grave, one silence. When storms roll in from the Ionian, lightning flashes over the same waters where searchlights once burned. Some locals say the thunder sounds like guns. Others call it the sea remembering. If you listen closely, between the wind and the waves, you can almost hear it whisper, "A single mistake, an entire fleet." From that night forward, no admiral would again go to sea without radar. No fleet would sail without decoded intelligence to guide it. Matapan was the turning point. The moment war passed from the age of sight to the age of signal. And once crossed, there was no return. For Britain, it was triumph. For Italy, tragedy. For the world, revelation. Cunningham summed it up best years later. At Matapan, we looked into the future, and the future looked back without emotion. The sea absorbed the wrecks, the men, and the noise, but it could not absorb the lesson.